I don't think we realized at that time that this is where it was going to be. We were thinking it was just going to be a virtual winery. We'll just make some side income. My NP job will be our like breadwinning, and it will be like our main thing. Dave made the sacrifice, but he still wanted to make Oregon wine.
Almost everyone we've spoken to is like, oh, they're secretly a singer or an artist or a writer. And I think that's such an interesting parallel with wine, because wine does have a very sciencey side to it for sure. Like you have to understand the chemistry, and it's what you're doing in viticulture school. But I love hearing that both of your background is in singing and that you have this brilliant eye for design. And
you know what? I'm gonna embrace it. And who cares what other people think? Let's try this. This is Cho is our last name. We're gonna celebrate that we're the first Korean American winemaker in Oregon, which isn't difficult because Oregon isn't. Realizing that depression was something that I was gonna lifelong deal with and accept that, that's what changed. And that was the acceptance that I needed. And so, yeah, now like I realize like clouds or like a rainy day, that depression can come and go, and that it's a season, and that it's not gonna like, kill me.
Lois Cho is the co-founder and CEO of Cho Wines, one of Oregon's fastest growing wineries and one of Wine Enthusiast's Future 40 tastemakers. Though she's relatively new to the wine scene, she has quickly become a beloved figure, having founded the AAPI Food and Wine Festival, and now a board member of Women in Wine Oregon and board director of Willamette Valley Wine Association. Okay, Lois,
Yes.
You are co-founder and CEO of Cho Wines, which is one of the fastest growing, most up and coming wineries in Oregon. You're the founder of the Oregon AAPI Food and Wine Festival. You're on the board of not only the Willamette Valley Wineries Association, but also Women in Wine Oregon, or Oregon Women in Wine. And you were named as one of the 40 Forward for Wine Enthusiast, you and Dave. Did I miss anything? I feel like there's been lots.
Yeah, we were a drinks innovator for 750 magazine and hot brand for Wine Business Monthly in 2024.
Amazing. And you've only been in the industry for what, less than 5 years?
Yeah, 2020 was when I jumped into wine.
So I'm wondering, like from the outside, I feel like we all feel like we know you because you do such a great job of documenting what you two do on social media, and we'll get to that. But, from the outside, it seems like you stepped into this role really confidently and really gracefully. And I'm wondering, like, what was it like coming into an industry that already I think a lot of people can think of as maybe pretentious or maybe unapproachable? And as a relative newcomer, like, what was that experience like? Was it ever rocky? Did you ever struggle with imposter syndrome, or did you just own it?
No, absolutely struggled with imposter syndrome. I was a nurse practitioner for 10 years prior. I was a registered nurse before that. So when 2020 came about, and I had actually asked Dave to leave the wine industry just before. So it goes back to us having jumped into the wine industry in 2014. Dave decided to study wine. We came up. I was like totally...
You're in California at this point.
When we left California, yeah. So we left and had a 10-month-old baby, decided to jump into wine.
And came here.
And come to Oregon. He studied wine at Oregon State. So I was really the one like supporting the dream, and what was the sugar mama. And it was the pandemic that brought us back down to California just before the pandemic, where I had seasonal depression and postpartum depression, and decided to ask Dave to leave it. Ended up moving down to California, and that's when we launched Cho Wines. And so...
Oh, from California.
Yeah. And so having launched our winery as what started out as a side project, I was like, Dave, I will help you in whatever way to get your side project started because you made the sacrifice for me. Definitely felt imposter syndrome. I didn't know much about wine, even though we were in it already for like 10 years, but it was really mainly Dave's thing. Yeah. And so when we started, I was helping him with like compliance and the administrative stuff, social media, and really was jumping into it from the perspective of someone who was new to wine. And I think that's why a lot of people related with our content, because I was like, hey, we're in the cellar. What are you doing, Dave? And asking him all these questions. And so the folks that were following along were really like engaged as well. Yeah. It also happened to be the pandemic. And so people were really engaged on social media. And so at the time, it was just really just me jumping in and showing and being real, my journey into wine, and it worked.
I think the pandemic in a lot of ways was like the great equalizer I know there was a lot of, people working on the front lines, people who didn't have to, who could stay home. But I think when people were more well-established and the pandemic came around, if you were unwilling to be flexible, try something new, or you had already done something a certain way for years and years, it was more difficult. Like, I know at Arden, we were only 2 years old. And so the fact that we didn't really know how we were supposed to do it meant we were willing to try anything. And that was really to our benefit. Do you think that, well, I guess to go back a little bit, was the fact that it was during the pandemic, did that shape your decision to leave nursing? Or were you already planning on leaving nursing?
No, I wasn't. It was always just going to be Dave's thing. I'm just sort of helping him in the supportive role just to help get it started, and we'll see where it goes. I don't think we realized at that time that this is where it was going to be. We were thinking it was just going to be a virtual winery. We'll just make some side income. My NP job will be our like breadwinning, and it will be like our main thing. Dave made the sacrifice, but he still wanted to make Oregon wine. So we're like, we'll just start it out that way. And
so was he flying up here to make wine?
Yeah.
Okay.
So what would happen is that I would fly up for 2 weeks during harvest. And since we had, grandma to help with the kids, I would fly up and film content. And then I would use that content and piecemeal it throughout the year so that it would seem like we were in Oregon all the time, but we weren't. And so, we were just getting really scrappy with it. And then I was working full time as an NP, and on my off time would, post content. And then that became a passion where I was like, oh, this is really fun. And this is another side of my brain that I'm not often using, but you were seeing rewards from it. And in 22 was when I ended up quitting. And I had the year before asked Dave, hey, what do you think if I quit my job and we did this full time? He's like, no, not yet. Like, we need that income. And then in 22, end of 21, we found our dream property. And then that's when we said, okay, if we're really going to jump into it, then we both have to be fully into it. And so,
I was going to ask, at what point did wine, and does it feel like it is your dream too now? Because I know it was his for a while.
Right.
And I didn't realize that it was you kind of pushing for like, maybe let's do this together full time. So did it feel like something you were excited to jump into rather than like, oh, I'm making the sacrifice now?
Right. Yeah. I would say yes. Like during that transition of finding our property, when I had actually found the property, because Dave had been looking for 10 years for different, projects that we could take on. And I don't know if you know people who really love camper vans and tents. So, where they're always, So he would always send me like, what do you think of this camper van or this Sprinter van? I was like, Dave, like, we don't need a camp trailer, but that was sort of what the vineyard search was like, where he would be like, what do you think of this land? We would have to live in a tiny house. I was like, we have 3 kids. That's not possible. Like, there were just a lot of properties we looked at during that time. But when we were in California, one night I was in bed and I was like 77 acres in Hillsborough, close to like Nike until it's all like southwest facing slope, great, gorgeous views of the sunset. We're like, I sent it to Dave. I was like, let's go check it out. And this is when we were in California, and he's like, are you crazy? Like, there's no vines planted. There's no building. Like, what are you thinking? I was like, let's just go. So we fly up. And we see it, and we see this incredible view. We see what's possible. And Dave and I look at each other and we're like, oh, we're so crazy. Like, this is going to take a lot. And then both of us were fully like invested. Initially, Dave was very apprehensive. And it was me like, Dave, like, this is what we know what you've been looking for. This is what you've been looking for. And he was like, but it's a huge sacrifice. We'd have to move back to Oregon. You had a really hard time with seasonal depression. Like, he was really sort of trigger shy as well. But I think he also wanted to see that this was something that I 100% wanted in on as well. And so, yeah, that was the turning point.
Have you always known, like, the journey of you discovering, oh, you're really good at this marketing side? And correct me if I'm wrong, but you even designed all of the branding and the labels for Cho. Like, was that always a passion of yours? Did you always know you had a marketing and design talent?
No, I had no idea. So, most people during the pandemic were either picking up hobbies like redesigning their kitchen,
baking bread.
And so I just first I looked up branding packages and realized they were like in the thousands of dollars. And we're like, we don't have that capital. So we're like, well, let me look it up on YouTube and see, what I can pick up in terms of like Photoshop or Adobe Illustrator. And so this is like all the packaging, all the bottling came out of that. I used to be a Sunday school teacher when I was little and was really into like crafting when I was younger, loved scrapbooking and taking pictures. And I think all of that translated. And when we lived in Corvallis, we had young kids. We had 3 young kids under 5. And so there was a mom's group I was really involved in, and I was on the leadership team there and did all the communications for them. So I did the social media and newsletters, and I think that translated quite a bit into
familiar with that.
And we had a band.
Wait, is this how you and Dave met?
No, we actually met by, we met by singing.
Okay, that's what I was thinking of. Yeah,
it was like a college intervarsity like church worship event. So we actually met at rehearsals. But before we had gotten into wine, we used to busk. So Dave he dropped out of college because I had found my passion in nursing, and he was 10 credits away from graduating and decided like, this isn't it. And so he dropped out, went to France for 2 weeks, came back, and he was like, I want to write my own music. And that's when he started he produced his own album. I sang backup with him. We would busk on the streets of Santa Monica. And then someone gave us their card and said, you should come play at our winery. And then that's how we got rolled into wine.
That's amazing. Well, and I love that creativity has been, the more of these conversations we've had, there's almost everyone we've spoken to is like, oh, they're secretly a singer or an artist or a writer. And I think that's such an interesting parallel with wine, because wine does have a very sciencey side to it for sure. Like, you have to understand the chemistry, and it's what you're doing in viticulture school. But I love hearing that both of your background is in singing and that you have this brilliant eye for design. And do you feel like do you feel like part of your success as a brand has been because you made it so fun, and like you have events like karaoke or stuff like that?
I think that's we really want to make wine approachable. And, our experience with wine was a little different, maybe very different from others with wine. And for us, it was him, buying wine at Bevmo and trying different styles and getting really interested, but and then volunteering for a harvest and jumping into it. So it became something that was a little bit more like casual for us, and something that he was learning on his own. But yeah, the art aspect of it, I think it makes a lot of sense, because, when you get your grapes in, you need to be creative with what you do with those grapes. Like, you can definitely have a certain style that you want to do, but at the same time, if the fruit comes in and suddenly you're inspired to do something different, there's a lot that you can play around with. And there is that aspect of it.
Are you getting more and more involved in the winemaking, or are you like, that's your thing, I just love the storytelling and the branding side of it?
So 2022, it's funny you say that, was my very first harvest with Dave. And so actually the 22 Dreamers that we have here.
You should tell us. Will you tell us about this wine?
Absolutely.
I got so wrapped into hearing all the things that we didn't taste the wine.
Thank you. Yeah, so the 22 Dreamers, so we called it the Dreamers Reserve. It's actually Dave's favorite barrels. And so we source from like 10 different vineyards from around the valley. And we called it the Dreamers Reserve. 21 was our first Dreamers Reserve, because obviously we're dreamers and we like chase this crazy pipe dream, and it became a reality. And the dream is eventually to have our own fruit from our own estate. And so this Dreamers Reserve is actually from 4 different vineyard sites, from differing elevations, differing soils, really a snapshot of the valley for that vintage. But 22 is also very special for us, because 22 was the year that I jumped into wine as well. And the very first harvest, Dave threw his back out.
This year, 2022.
It was our very first year making wine together, and the first fruit came in, and if you think of the big presses, they're like massive. And they press the juice and there's this big press pan that it falls into. Well, he tried to lift it by himself and then he threw his back out. And so for 2 weeks, he was bedridden. Oh my God. And so because of that, I literally had like 3 days of training and then suddenly I was thrown into it. And he was calling me like to go sample bricks and run around and do all the things that he couldn't do. And so I would go like, snip clusters and bring them to him. And then we'd test the bricks and he'd look at the sample and be like, okay, we're ready to pick. And then I'd be the one running around and receiving the fruit and all that. It was one of the hardest experiences of my life. And I cried the first day of harvest because I realized how hard he was working during harvest. We call the partners of winemakers or farmers harvest widows because you really essentially don't see your partners during crush. And ironically, I am hosting Harvest Widows this afternoon for a happy hour.
Well, I want to hear about that project in a couple minutes because I know that's been a passion project of yours. Yeah.
And so, I cried because I was like, I was at home thinking that you were just la-di-da, stopping grapes and having so much fun. And I'm home with the kids and he'd stumble in at like 11 p.m. I would have, taken the kids to daycare, worked all day, picked them up, bathed them, fed them. And suddenly I'm like exhausted and he stumbles in at 11 saying he's hungry. And I'm like so resentful. Yeah. But then when I actually experienced it myself, I was like, I felt so bad. Oh my gosh, honey, you were working so hard. So yes, I did not like Harvest for making the wine. That was the attitude, or like, what was your takeaway? Like, oh, I can't wait to do more of this, or like, oh no, I'm good. I was like, I'm good. You make the wine.
I'll sell it.
Yes, I'll sell it. You make the wine. It's a great combo, for sure.
I mean, that's a gift to be able to have that experience, because I feel like in any relationship, especially romantic ones, often we resent the other person because we're not walking in their shoes. And it's rare that you like have the opportunity to do that. Yeah. How has it been being in business with your romantic partner? Because I tried it and I couldn't do it. And like I had Kate Norris on here a week ago, and I admired that like she's not together with Tom anymore, but they're still business partners. And you see all aspects of that in the wine industry. But has it brought you closer? Have it forced you to grow?
It has been really hard. Yeah. And I will be like brutally honest. Yeah. At the start of this year, when we opened our tasting room, it was rough. And part of it is that like up until now, like the winemaking and the marketing has always been separate. But when we opened the tasting room, we were in the same space like all the time. And Dave has worked in the hospitality industry. And so he has a certain level of experience that I don't have. But in the tasting room, it was like, he'd be standing there and he'd be watching the employees. And I'm like, Dave, you need to like simmer down just a little bit. And I think that works in the cellar. And the tasting room, my leadership is a little bit different. And so we took some time to figure out that like, it's healthier for your marriage, healthier for a business if we keep those two separate. Yeah. So now the tasting room and more like DTC marketing side is my realm, and the winemaking is his, and our marriage has never been better.
I think that's really, really smart. It's almost like front of house, back of house in restaurants. Yes. It's like you have to kind of know what is you have to have the hierarchy, because the hierarchy like protects feelings and keeps people safe.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, 100%. And there are different strengths that each of us brings to the business. And it's discovering that, okay, he needs to trust me with certain things and I trust him with certain things, and then just understanding. But it took time for us to figure out what our strengths were and where we needed to let go a little bit.
So a lot of the news in the press that Cho has received is related to Dave being the first Korean American winemaker in Oregon. Mm-hmm. Were you aware that that was going to be such a big part of the story from day one? Like, were you kind of ready for that, or did that surprise you and then affect what you did in the future?
We knew that it was part of the story, and it's actually something that we celebrated quite a bit. We actually had, I personally had met with a distributor early on when we were trying to get our brand out. And he had surprisingly told me, because we were launching in May, which is API Heritage Month and Oregon Wine Month. But both things that we celebrate quite a bit, and is for us something that we're really proud of. Yeah. And then, when you have an Asian last name on your bottle, it is something that comes up, like Cho, what does it mean? Well, it's our last name and what's the significance of it? And the distributor had told us, like, I actually don't think it's a really great idea to highlight your heritage.
Really?
And said that it's not going to fly in the wine industry. And I was really taken aback. And it was one of those, like, I know you didn't ask for it, but here's my 2 cents.
Of course.
And so obviously didn't go with them. But that was a turning point for me where it was like, you know what, I'm going to embrace it. And who cares what other people think? Let's try this. Cho is our last name. We're going to celebrate that we're the first Korean American winemaker in Oregon, which isn't difficult because Oregon isn't as
still, it's like you could easily like whitewash that or just run away from that and call it whatever.
And actually, Dave had, like, there was an interview that asked, like, how does your heritage play into winemaking? And his initial response was like, oh, it doesn't. It doesn't. Like, but later as we, like, sort of dealt, I think he was afraid of any backlash that would potentially come from saying that, oh yeah, my heritage plays into this. He was like, I make great quality wine and my heritage has nothing to do with it. I think that's sort of what he wanted to highlight.
Totally.
But later we realized, like, palate is all what you've grown up eating. Your palate is what shapes your winemaking style and what you want to pair your wines with. And, he grew up eating a lot of sushi because his mom had a Korean-owned Japanese sushi restaurant. And so, our initial sparkling wines, like our Blanc de Noir that we had, like we, dosage based on how well it paired with sushi. Like, so those things later we found, like, that's something to celebrate. And that's where the idea of Oregon API food and wine came about too.
Are there particular regions or styles in the world that have always been touch points for Dave? Or, did you find, like, oh, with whatever food you loved the most, there were certain regions that you were drinking a lot of that you aim towards in your wines?
Yeah. So like I said, my experience with wine is not as expansive as Dave's, but he, every month we would put $500 aside. And that was his, like, wine play money. And so he would get to buy wines from anywhere in the world. And so that's how he developed his palate. I have found that he has, especially with white wines, has tended towards more like a Chablis style. So he doesn't oak a whole lot in our whites or our sparklings. And so I'm not sure if Chablis is anywhere in a region that has a lot of seafood.
I mean, Chablis is near-ish the coast, and it's also the soils are ancient seabeds, and so it does go well with seafood. So 100%. Yeah. So could you talk a little bit about why you saw the need to start AAPI and how that process came about? It's wildly successful, it seems like, at the first go.
So do you know Joshua Chang?
Yes.
Okay, so Joshua Chang founded 503. Ironically, we met through TCAT at her BIPOC block party.
Amazing.
And so we were pouring at the BIPOC block party, and he was the photographer for the event.
He's the photographer for everything. Right. He's the best.
And he's been around I saw someone post something from 2009.
Yeah.
He shot something for John.
He took our first pictures at the wine shop when I moved back, but that was 2015. But he's been around for a long time.
So this random Asian photographer in wine country, right? So he sees us at the BIPOC block party, and he's like, "Who?" It's like tasting the wine. It's like, "Who are you guys? Where'd you come from?"
Because you were pouring.
We were pouring. And he's like, "How have I not heard of you guys?" And like, so that was, I think, 2021 or 22. I think it was 22. And so that we met, and we became good friends. And then like half a year, maybe less than half a year later, he was like, API Heritage Month is coming up, and it's Oregon Wine Month. And he's like, what do you think if we brought, and he's like a big foodie, right? And we're big foodies. And he's like, what if we got some of the chefs and foodie influencers together and did like a big potluck, like an API potluck, and with your wines, and we'll do a photo shoot, and like, it'll be a fun time. And I was like, that's a great idea. And then I'm like ruminating on it for like a week. I was like, Josh, what if we invited everyone? So that's how it came about.
Wow.
Because it's like this passion for food. Like if you go anywhere in Portland, like what are some of the cuisines that like come to mind, right? Like heavy API.
Oh
like,
yeah.
You have your Korean, you have your Thai.
You have the Earls, the Peter Cho's, like they run this town.
Right, exactly. And so we're like, well, it makes sense, to bring those chefs into wine country where we don't have a whole lot of diversity. We used to live in McMinnville. And, Dave and I, having lived in Southern California and LA with like that rich, foodie culture.
Yep.
And then moving, which McMinnville is growing and is amazing, but not a whole lot of Asian cuisine.
Oh, I know. I grew up in Sherwood.
Yeah. And so, we learned to cook. We would, for date night, we would go drive out to Portland. And it was expensive because it would be like you're paying for 2 hours of just driving time for your babysitter. We're like, we need to bring more diverse cuisine into the Valley. And I think that's why we made it very intentional to host the first API Food and Wine Fest in wine country, to bring those chefs out to wine country. And it like blew people's minds. Like Michael Alberti, wine reviewer for Wine Enthusiast and Oregonian came and he wrote this article. Like, I looked out into the Dundee Hills and for a second thought, where am I? And where did all these young, diverse people come from? And it's like, they're here.
Yeah.
And if we create events that attract these people, they'll come. And I think that's how we felt about the winery and the tasting room too. Like, if you build it, they will come. We have seen this time and time with events and pop-ups. And it was a big risk with what we did with our tasting room too. But, you were there on a Saturday and you see all these people come in and
and I had that same thought of like, where did this crowd come from in wine country? Because so often you go to tasting rooms, these very iconic Oregon tasting rooms, and everyone's over the age of 55, and it was so refreshing to go in and see all of these young people having a blast and drinking wine. And like, that's what the wine industry has been kind of bemoaning the last couple years. Like, our wine generation is dying off, and like, well, a certain wine generation is dying off. Like, maybe the type that can afford or have the desire to pay for these big cult cabs from certain parts of the world, but like, there has to be welcoming of a new generation, and the old guard needs to be. Have you felt welcomed for the most part, like coming into wine country? I mean, the fact that you now sit on all of these boards, like, to me, I think of you as kind of like a disruptor in the industry, like from a branding perspective, from, you just kind of like came on the scene and embraced it in a really different, creative, unapologetic way. And it just seems like people are really responding to that.
Yeah, I think it was very intentional for us. Like, our wine name, Cho Wines, is our last name, but it also means carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, the makeup of all living things. And so whether it's the food at the table, the wine that you're drinking, the people that you're sharing it with, that we're all made up of the same elements. And that has been very core to our business and core to our relationships that we've been cultivating in the Valley. When we first got onto the scene, I was very intentional about being very uplifting at other businesses too. So whether it be like on our social media channel, you'll see us collaborating with tons of people. But coming into Willamette Valley as well, and like the history of Willamette Valley, I mean, you see all these pioneers that came and collaborated with each other. It is not just a marketing ploy. It is so true that in the Willamette Valley, everybody wants everyone else to do well. And so we've 100% felt welcomed into the industry. I'm a big supporter of the Regional Wine Association, as well as, just trying to get the Oregon story out there. And I'm really excited for what you guys are doing here too.
Well, I think you're setting an example out in wine country, honestly, what restaurants in Portland could do a little better. And I say that with love. Like, all my restaurant owner friends I love, but I really believe in like a rising tide lifts all ships, and I love how collaborative the Willamette Valley is. And I would like to see more of that within the restaurant community too. And even between both worlds, because I feel like they're very entwined, the food and the wine. And that's why I love what you did with AAPI. I mean, for so many other reasons, but also that you like really are tying those two worlds together. Is that going to be a regular thing that you put on?
Yeah. I'm always trying to think of different ways to grow, and have played around with the idea, well, what if we brought the festival to Portland? But we're like, I feel like that's been done before with food festivals. And so then how about if we took it on the road? And so that is something that I would love to do, is to take, a few of the API winemakers, take a few of the API chefs from Oregon, and then take us on the road and pop up in, areas like New York or LA, Florida, Chicago, and just show what Oregon has. Because Oregon has something so unique. And it's what brings a lot of us here. We have these wonderful natural resources. It's a beautiful place to live. And the people are so collaborative, and there's this rich culture, even though when you look at the numbers in terms of demographics, it doesn't seem so diverse. But when you really pocket down into like Portland, you'll see so many different cultures, so many different styles, and all this collaboration that's happening through pop-ups. And I think that would be something that would be really exciting to take on the road.
I mean, you're clearly, just hearing you talk, you're such a gifted and articulate communicator that it's not surprising to see like why people are scrambling to like put you on a board here. Like, you know what I mean? And I think I'm curious how you have been able to approach specifically the social media aspect in a way that has not just like ruined you psychologically. Because I think a lot of small business owners, especially now, see the need for social media, but view it as like this obligation or something they have to do. And I've felt sucked into my phone to a point that I can tell is not healthy, And I have a hard time finding that balance of like, how do you view it in a, it seems to me like you have a healthy relationship with it, period, but also you're using it for good. Yeah. Like you're spreading this very positive message. Like, how do you output that much content and keep a healthy balance with it?
That's a good question. I don't know. I enjoy it. I think that's the thing. Like, I use it as a tool for connection. And I think because I felt so distant with the wine community when we were in California, it was my way to introduce ourselves to people in the industry that otherwise knew nothing about us. And so we started off with 200 followers. We were talking about subscribers, but we started off with 200 in 2020, the harvest of 2020. And I made it very intentional to reach out like guerrilla marketing tactic style, where I would like cut and paste. Hey, we're Dave and Lois Cho, first American winemakers in Oregon. Check us out at Get Cho Wines, not your average Cho. And I would cut and paste that and look at who was engaging with brands that were similar to ours, who were the people that were liking, commenting the most, sharing things. Then I would reach out to those people, cut and paste, and send it to them. And that was my way of connecting with people, whether they be consumers, industry folks, or people in the trade. And those relationships have lasted, where like those people were the people that are championing us, that are wanting to, oh, you should talk to the Chos. And when you look back, you don't realize that's what actually was the initial relationship starter. And so, I think that's probably why, because it was so integral to growing our business, but also the networking that we've created in the wine world. But yes, there's definitely a potential in terms of social media to get sucked in. And people are always like, who are you following? I'm like, I'm following people, but I'm really not watching other people's content a whole lot. Yeah. I'm looking at the current trends and I'm using that, but I'm not trying to compare as much, and as much as like just,
that's probably key. Well, and even just having the intention, I love that reframe of like enjoying the connection, like being there for connection and finding the joy in that. As opposed to just putting content out and then watching the likes and comparing those likes to however many likes you got on the last video or something.
It's a scary hole to jump into when you're just chasing likes and follows. But if you're using it as a way, you want to have engaged followers, and to have engaged followers, you have to be engaged with the people that are, following your content, and listen to, what they want to see more of. So I do a lot of polls and interaction. Like when we were building our tasting room, I would like put polls like, what color do you like, in terms of like what color we want to paint. And they helped choose our colors for a tasting room. Like, should I use gold? And they're like, yes. And I still do that. I mean, like there's a canvas bag that we're trying to rebrand, or, and I'm asking, should I keep it black or should we make it green, or what are your opinions? And I'll actually look at what, trends people are wanting. And, that's.
But that just tells me you have like community at the center. Right. It's less about your ego and like, we're so cool, but like, we're here to serve you. We're here to I want you to enjoy this. I want you to be a part of it. And wine can feel, I think, to many people alienating and pretentious and like they're not a part of the club.
Right.
And you've literally flipped that.
So I recently did this TikTok trend with the straws. Did you see this? So there's this trend where this girl is tasting different types of Diet Coke. And so she'll have like a fountain soda, she'll have like a bottle, a can. And so she's like trying to decide, she can tell what each is. So I was like, I just took that trend and then did it with our bottles of wine at the end of the day. Cause after doing, tastings, there's always wine left over. And so we're like, let's do this. It was very irreverent. Everyone's like, oh my gosh, you need the aroma to tell what wine it was. And we're like, I got like 2 out of 6 of the wines, or 2 out of 8 of the wines.
Oh, like people were giving you crap because you weren't smelling them out of the... Okay.
But that's part of it is like, it's silly. Some people are like, oh my gosh, no, you can't be doing that. But it got a lot
why
of views.
too?
Yeah. So it's sort of like almost using social media to your gain and just playing around with it where you, a lot of people are on it just to, for entertainment. And so that's what you're making. You're creating content that's engaging, entertaining, educates people too, because then it gets people to comment on it. But you just have to get creative and have fun.
Could you talk about is that something you can't talk about, your media project, the Harvest Widow documentary?
The documentary is actually on indefinite hold right now.
Okay.
However, I would love to talk about, what inspired it. Yeah. So a lot of the winemakers, farmers, their wives are very central to the success of the wine because they're at home taking care of the house,
making life go on
with the kids. And so the Harvest Widow came about because during my journey being the Harvest Widow, I struggled with seasonal depression, postpartum depression. Our kids were like, we had a newborn, we had a 3 and a 4.5-year-old when we moved to wine country. And so it was a really rough season for me. And so I realized like I need to create.
Were you working as well?
I was working full time. Well, 3 days a week, 10, 12-hour shifts. But when we were in Corvallis, when he was going to school at Oregon State, I had a big moms group I had mentioned before that I was so connected with and did not feel that void at all and really felt supported. And, when we had we had 2 babies in Corvallis and, had meal trains and just a lot of community surrounding me. When we picked up and left to wine country for him to work at Stoller in Argyle, it was a big shift where like suddenly I lost that whole support system and I didn't have any family and we were working. And so those harvest seasons actually dovetailed into a really dark season for me because, it was 2 months of him being away all the time. Like the longest he worked was 26 days straight during harvest. And they were like 16-hour days. So, really. And
you had a newborn?
Yeah. And so it's almost like single momming it for that period. And so that's where Harvest Widow came from. But I started this brunch called Harvest Widow's Brunch where like all of Dave's friends in the industry that are winemakers or, worked in the vineyard, I would invite all their partners to come over for brunch. And then we would create like freezer meals. So each of us would create like 2 or 3 meals and make large batches. And then we would come together and then we would swap those freezer meals so we could feed each other's families. And then create that sense of community. And so we did that for a couple of years. It's funny you mentioned Harvest Widow because now for the first time, like I'm able to host at our tasting room. And so today we're having our very first Harvest Widows happy hour. And so we're doing something similar where we're all getting together and just to celebrate the start of harvest season and create a support system for each other.
What are the tools that do you think it helped that 2022 vintage, did that help you understand a little more or feel better about that? Or does it still feel really hard to be a Harvest Widow? Or what tools have you acquired along the way?
Yeah, I wouldn't consider myself a Harvest Widow anymore as much because I'm so in it, but want to create a space for those because I understand very well how isolating it can be. Some of the tools is like creating batch meals early on, creating community and connecting with people like right at the beginning so that, you don't feel alone throughout. And so if you need like an emergency, like, coffee out with someone, then you create that system. But yeah, I don't know if that answers your question. But
No, it does. Do you have any advice for women who want more community in their lives? Or, because I think not everyone is going to be married to a winemaker, but a lot of women are dating other people, their partners who have whether it's finance, whatever it is, where like it's a world they're not a part of.
Yeah. And I think it's putting yourself out there. Yeah. Because there are lots of groups out there too, where, I think finding something that you're interested in where you could connect with someone over a common thread. Like the moms group for me was like huge. Every Tuesday we would have, moms with kids 5 and under would get together every Tuesday. And it was just this gathering where we had free childcare and a speaker come in and snacks and coffee. And anytime someone was newly pregnant, they would bring brownies in to like announce that they're like, they're having a new baby. So it's just creating that weekly gathering and just having a consistent gathering place. I think if you find a handful of people where you have something, whether it be kids or whether it be, maybe you like quilting or, where you can, you could be the starter.
Did you feel like most of the conversations that go around those circles, just like the space to vent or commiserate? Or it sounds like you actually had speakers come in who were like inspiring. What kind of speakers were they?
We had pediatricians come in. We had like motivational speakers, pelvic floor therapists.
Wow.
A lot of like really just mom related. We had a panel of experienced moms come in and talk about like parenting at different stages of life. And I had asked the question, what stage is the easiest? And they're like, they're all hard, all different kinds of hard. But it was just like real talk. We did like a clothing drive or like toy swap drive where everyone brings their clothes and toys in, and then whatever you need, you take, and whatever you don't need, leave. And lots of fun ideas. But
that's so inspiring.
Yeah, isn't it?
I mean, this sort of leads into the next question, which is, again, like I know social media probably plays into this, but I hear the debate a lot of women saying, can I have it all? Can I have a career? Can I have kids? And like look beautiful and have a successful social media account while I'm doing it. And like from the outside, at least, it really looks like you are this beacon of 3 kids who are all young kids. It's not like they're out of the house, and you've built this incredible brand and you're so engaged in the community. Like, does that just come easy to you?
It's because of Grandma.
Oh, Grandma?
Yeah, Grandma lives with us. So
really?
Dave's mom. Okay, so I have so much to talk about. How much
Please,
time
we got time.
So both of our families are from Korea. So Dave was actually born in South Korea, but Dave's family immigrated in the 90s. My family immigrated in the 1970s. So my family immigrated first. And then we both met in Vancouver, Canada. So part of, I feel like both of our upbringings, my grandma, my great grandma and my grandma helped watch me when my mom went to work. Same with his grandma. After Dave's dad passed away from cancer, his grandma flew in to help and help do laundry and do all the things while Dave's mom ran a business. So like, I think that multi-generational aspect of Asian culture, but also our families have shaped sort of how we grew up and how our family is structured now. And that now Dave's mom is newly retired, and she's actually half investor in the vineyard.
Wow.
And so when we had this crazy idea to take on this vineyard project, we sat down with Dave's mom as well and said, this is going to be a huge undertaking. If we end up doing this, we need your support, because we all know how it went the last time we were up in Oregon trying to pursue this without any family support. Are you in too? And so she was like, she ended up saying like, I am fully in. And without her backing or her sacrifice, because she could be fully retired right now and just living her life. But she sold her business and then is half investor in the vineyard. And so she equally wants to see this do well. It's a legacy that we're carrying on. For her to be an immigrant and have owned a small business, not having spoken a word of English, and had like 30 employees that she was managing, like that is the legacy that she passed on to us. And so we can do it because she did it. And she is helping us, help watch the kids. And so it seems like on the outside, well, no, she's doing it all, but really there's a support system behind us that makes it happen. And currently Dave's mom is in Korea. My mom flew in to help us during harvest. And so we're just really lucky to have moms that are just 100% on board to see us succeed too.
I love hearing that because I think that, I don't know, as you get older, you see your parents and your grandparents get older. And, I've watched my grandma go through assisted living. She tried to live with my parents and they didn't quite have the care that they needed to help her. And, I think there's a different mentality around aging in the US, and so many other cultures, I think, do it right, where it's like you do live with your parents,
right?
And your parents are the childcare for the kids in a lot of ways, and the US is so independent, for better or for worse. Yeah. And I hear people, and I mean, I love my parents. I love you, Mom and Dad. But I also can imagine it being hard to live with them, especially when you're in the prime of your working life. And it's an interesting thing to try and reframe, but I think we look at the system we have with just once you get to a certain age, you go to assisted living and you never see anyone is so awful and sad.
It is a hard transition for her, going from being a full-time working mom to suddenly having to stay home and help with the kids. And she always had, help too. And so it was a really hard transition watching her go into retirement as well. It's not perfect, but she jumps in, it's crazy. She will clean the house and do the dishes and watch the kids, take them to practice, and at the sacrifice of her own body. And it's a different work ethic that, I'm we can call a babysitter. We need to go out for this event. We'll call a babysitter. You can rest. And she's like, no, why would you call a babysitter? That doesn't make any sense. It's a different culture and different work ethic that I think we could never even mimic.
It's inspiring too, to look at, everyone is on their own different path, but I just think it's inspiring to see that model set in the US of, it just reinforces the way you look at community. It's clear where it came from, that you both came from these legacies of families and mothers and aunts that it was all about. Right. It was very family centric.
Both of us moved quite a bit. I calculated, us combined have moved 50 times in our lifetimes. We're only 40.
Wow.
But, if our families could move halfway across the globe, not speaking the language, and build a community, build a life and a legacy for their families, why couldn't we move states and start a winery when we speak the language? It's that, we can do it, that can-do attitude. And that has been our inheritance from our families.
What was the most helpful thing for you when you struggled with seasonal depression in Oregon? I'm impressed that you could ask for the help that you needed, or just say this isn't working for me. We need to go, I need to be close. Was it that you needed that support system, or have you learned more about yourself over the years of how to take care of yourself?
It was a huge advantage that I was a nurse practitioner. So I knew the signs and I understood what I could do. So it took some time to figure out happy light and vitamin D and making sure I exercise frequently and, seeing a counselor, all these things. It took time for me to figure out. And even when I knew, medication was an option too. And even though I prescribed, antidepressants all the time, really realizing that I had to work through the challenges where why was I so resistant to it?
What's the root of it? Yeah.
Yeah. And so it took time for me to see that and realize that depression was something initially I had thought was more of a temporary, it's seasonal. Oh, it's postpartum. But when we moved back down to California and it was the pandemic and it was supposed to solve everything, we're back in California. It's sunny. We have family support. And then the pandemic happened.
And you're a frontline worker.
Yeah. And I'm a frontline worker and I'm driving home and I'm so depressed right now. And it's not better. Realizing that depression was something that I was going to lifelong deal with and accept that. That's what changed. And that was the acceptance that I needed. And so, yeah, now like I realize like clouds or like a rainy day, that depression can come and go, and that it's a season, and that it's not gonna like, kill me. That took time to, and that's a whole nother discussion, but it took time to really realize that and figure it out. And I think being a nurse practitioner really helped me understand. And, as a nurse, you see all cycles of life, from birth to death. And that's one, part of my experience as a healthcare provider that I think has also shaped who I am, and really realizing that, there are different cycles of life. And I went through a really big cycle, and having kids while we moved, and all these big like life changes. So yeah, I think it's a sign of hope for those who are struggling with depression, is that like there's help out there, and there's other people who've gone through it, and that you just need to reach out, and that there's people that want to support you and help you through it.
Well, and I love just the idea that accepting that it's there, because I think fear and like resistance make anything worse, whether it's depression or fear or, I went through stage fright, and it's like you have to admit it, and that kind of takes the charge off of it, the sting off of it, and allows you to move through it. And you're like, it's just a feeling. It's going to come up.
Exactly.
It'll pass through me, but if I fight it, it's going to make it worse.
Right. Definitely.
So I think that's really inspiring. Gosh, I want to be respectful of your time. What do you think your superpower is in the wine space, or just life in general? And is that related to being a woman or not?
I think I have a lot of empathy, and I feel like I can connect with people on a way where whether it be like as an employer, and really because I, had and worked through a lot of mental health, that I can be a better employer because of that. Because I'm a parent and was a mom and carried a child, and, or am a mom. I think all those experiences help me see like that everyone is different, and everybody has different strengths and weaknesses. And I think that's a huge strength, in that I can see individual qualities in, what they bring to the table. And that has been a very big part of now bringing a team on. I mean, it used to be just me and Dave, and now we have like 9 employees.
Wow.
It's crazy. And so to never brush anyone off and bring someone, usually when I hire someone, I see a strength in them, and that's why I brought them on. But then also it takes time to see if those strengths work well with our business, and see what other strengths they might have, and not pigeonhole into the one role that I put them into. And I think that's a big power in being able to utilize people to their strengths.
Yeah. Seeing that, championing that connection sounds like there. Well, and I'm assuming like that probably helped you a lot as a nurse practitioner too.
Absolutely.
Yeah. If people have been living under a rock and for some reason do not follow you on social media, where do they find you, and how do they keep in touch with Cho?
Instagram is usually where we're most active, but get Cho Wines, on TikTok as well. And then my personal Instagram is Not Your Average Cho.
How do you differentiate? Just more personal thoughts on family and motherhood and stuff on your personal one?
Yeah, that's a good question. I feel like the personal one, it's all sort of melded together now. Initially, Not Your Average Cho was the one that had the most followers initially, because I really wanted, engaged people who wanted to engage with our brand. I wanted them to be engaged with us too. But somewhere Get Cho Wine sort of has taken off now, and so I'm not really sure what Not Your Average. But
follow them both,
Both, yeah.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your time and wisdom and wine, and taking the time during harvest. I know it's going to be a busy next 2 months for you, so thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Here, cheers.
Cheers.